The man, in a place where the sunlight reaches, suddenly stopped his steps. He caught the attention of a passing priest. However, after exchanging a glance with the priest, he hurriedly fled in the opposite direction. The priest used some special methods. People started shouting and screaming. Then they picked up torches to burn the man to death. The man unexpectedly emerged from the raging flames. What kind of supernatural powers does the man possess? And why was he being yelled at by everyone? The man's name is Dracula. He is known as the king of vampires. Yet few people know that Dracula, before becoming a vampire, he was extremely cruel. Dracula was born in Romania. At the age of 10, he was offered as a sacrifice and taken to the territory of the Turks, where he became a killing machine. As an adult, Dracula was brave and skilled in battle. He led his troops to capture a city and impaled his enemies on wooden stakes. Hence, he was called the Impaler. Many years passed. Dracula returned to his homeland, married, and had children. He became the king of this small Eastern European country. Dracula grew tired of the days of war and submitted to the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, thinking it would keep him away from the battlefield. He didn't know that he couldn't escape the curse of fate. His peaceful days were disrupted by a helmet. On that day, Dracula, accompanied by his guards, in a river near the border, discovered a Turkish soldier's helmet. Dracula knew well the nature of the Sultan. The appearance of scouts signified that the Sultan had started to suspect him. In the distance, there was a tall mountain. The helmet had rolled down from the mountain. Little did he know, it would be the beginning of a curse. Dracula led 2 guards to the mountaintop. There was a cave here. Dracula and his 2 companions entered the cave. They found the scouts' traces, but their blood had been drained. The scene of death was terrifying. The cave was filled with bones. While Dracula was contemplating, deep within the cave, something was watching them intently. Amidst screams of agony, one of the guards was dragged away. The other guard was about to react. While he was no match for the speed and strength of the other party, Dracula tried to strike back with his sword, but he was knocked aside. He crawled back to the cave entrance. The creature seemed to fear sunlight. It didn't pursue him relentlessly. That's how Dracula managed to escape. Looking at the creature in the dark cave, Dracula was still shocked. At that moment, he couldn't imagine. A few days later, he would return here once again. Back to the castle, the priest told Dracula an ancient legend. Many years ago, an ancient Roman prophet once spoke of a story that would happen in the future. There was a brave warrior. In order to gain power, he would make a deal with a demon from hell. The price was transforming into a monster that feed on blood, and only being able to act at night. During the day, he had to hide in caves. There was a solution. By finding the next successor, the curse would be broken. The warrior could see the light of day again. Dracula was a king of a small Eastern European country. He could have led his people to live a peaceful life, but he faced a threat from the Ottoman Empire. They looked down upon Dracula. The envoys they sent demanded 1,000 children as tribute, and if he didn't comply, the Ottoman Empire would invade in force. Such unreasonable demands were a declaration of war. Dracula knew the Turks well. He knew the children would be enslaved, so he decided to personally seek the Sultan. As they had grown up together, he hoped the Sultan would spare his people. However, the Ottoman Empire was powerful at that time. The Sultan commanded an army of 100,000. Conquering this land would be too easy. The Sultan's mind was filled with thoughts of conquest. He paid no attention to Dracula. He just urged Dracula to quickly hand over the 1,000 children as punishment for Dracula's conscription. Besides, the Sultan also demanded from Dracula to send his own son as a hostage. The queen heard this news and was saddened. She didn't allow her son to go, but the Sultan's guards had already come to take him. At that moment, Dracula's son stepped forward. He showed no fear towards the enemy and comforted Dracula. He said he was already capable of taking responsibility. His words strengthened Dracula's determination. He told his son to run back halfway. Then he decisively drew his sword and killed the guards. Soon, the Sultan's guards were quickly killed. Yet, this also marked the 2 countries officially entered a state of war. Although Dracula was brave, facing the Ottoman Empire's army, he was like an egg hitting a rock. Dracula knew he had to think of another way. He went to the Giant's Peak in search of the legendary blood demon. He knew the blood demon truly existed because Dracula had witnessed the incredible power of vampires. His 2 former generals were both killed by vampires. After a journey of some time, Dracula found a cave. An old man in the cave offered his assistance. The old man cut his arm, letting the blood flow into a skull. The old man said, as long as he drank all the blood, Dracula would gain the desired power. This power was beyond imagination. The price was being able to act only at night, being incredibly dependent on blood, and all his loved ones would die because of him. After a struggle of thoughts, Dracula drank all the blood. Soon, he felt everything spinning. Everything before his eyes slowly turned into darkness. Not knowing how long had passed, he slowly opened his eyes and found himself lying in a river. A strange sensation ran through his entire body. He stood up. Suddenly, he realized he could hear the sounds of spiders hunting nearby. He saw animals miles away in the forest, and could even see the stars and the Milky Way in the sky. These were things he had never dared to imagine before. Dracula understood that the power of the vampire had bestowed upon him. However, before he could rejoice for long, he saw a fire in the distance. Dracula felt something was amiss. He transformed into a bat and swiftly flew to the battlefield. Now, he was not just facing the challenge of fighting hundreds of enemies alone. Dracula transformed into the scythe of the Grim Reaper, relentlessly reaping the enemy soldiers on the field. Within an hour, the vanguard of the Ottoman Empire was completely annihilated. At this moment, the soldiers who came to support Dracula were stunned. Dracula gave the order to lead the people in retreat to the monastery on the mountain. Although he was incredibly powerful now, facing an army of 100,000, Dracula couldn't gamble with the lives of the people. The monastery had a strategic location, an excellent place to defend. While Dracula rested in the evening, his wife wanted to comfort him, but accidentally triggered his bloodlust. He looked at the veins on his wife's body. Dracula seemed to see the flowing blood inside. He struggled to suppress his bloodthirsty impulse. He ran into the woods. Meanwhile, a beggar suddenly appeared. The beggar cut his flesh with a knife, wanting to feed Dracula with his own fresh blood. It turned out, the beggar worshipped vampires extremely, and wanted to become Dracula's servant, but Dracula didn't want to accept. After educating the beggar and driving him away, Dracula didn't want to become a devil. But the next day, his wife discovered something was strange, as she noticed that the scars on Dracula's body had vanished. Under the pressure of his wife's inquiries, Dracula admitted to his dealings with the devil. Dracula drew his dagger, cut open the nearby curtain, and the sunlight streaming in caused his skin to start peeling. His wife also believed everything, but seeing her husband in this state, she felt deeply heartbroken. She knew Dracula did all this to protect his subjects, as he couldn't appear under the sun. His wife announced to others that he had gone out for investigation, and urged everyone to hasten their pace, heading towards the mountaintop monastery for refuge. During the journey, the group was ambushed by Ottoman soldiers, and there were few guards among the soldiers on the move, while the civilians were unarmed. In this critical moment, Dracula arrived suddenly, resolving the crisis, and assisting the civilians in successfully entering the monastery. Dracula personally supervised his subordinates to continuously forge weapons. However, even so, his fear of sunlight during the day raised suspicions from a priest, who arrived with a silver long sword. The priest cut open Dracula's tent, and sunlight flooded in instantly. Dracula's skin began decaying in that instant. People were frightened and panicked by this situation. They seemed to forget that he was the king who protected them all. The people grabbed torches, preparing to burn this demon. Thick smoke obscured the blazing sun. Dracula emerged from the flames, unharmed. He looked at the subjects who wanted to kill him, and questioned whether they had forgotten his kindness. If it weren't for his wife intervening in time, Dracula would have unleashed a massacre. Meanwhile, the Sultan also learned that Dracula had become a vampire. He immediately ordered all soldiers to wear blindfolds, to prevent them from seeing anything that could affect morale. This kept the troops completely unaware of the situation, and slowed their advance. By the time the army reached the foot of the mountain, as night fell, this was the very situation Dracula had wanted. For in the darkness, he was nearly invincible. Dracula summoned an army of tens of thousands of bats. He simply raised his hand high, and the bats transformed into a black, clawed arm that struck the enemy with tremendous force. He then gestured a fist, and struck the Ottoman army, causing massive casualties. Sensing the moment was right, Dracula transformed into a swarm of bats, and infiltrated the enemy's ranks, decapitating the Sultan. But to his surprise, the Sultan turned out to be a substitute. Dracula realized the situation had taken a grave turn. An enemy force then launched an assault on the monastery atop the mountain, indiscriminately slaughtering civilians, including Dracula's own wife. She was pushed off the cliff. Dracula flew to her. Witnessing his wife hit the ground, his wife pleaded with Dracula to drink her blood, as the sun was about to rise, which would render Dracula powerless. To save their son and their people, Dracula sank his fangs into his wife's neck. From that moment on, the benevolent King Dracula was no longer here. The vampire ancestor Dracula had descended. Now consumed by rage, the Turkish soldiers thought Dracula was defeated. Unaware that he was not alone, he commanded an army of vampires. It turned out Dracula had used his own blood to revive his dying people, transforming them into a powerful vampire army. Now with his undead legion, Dracula unleashed a massacre upon the Ottoman forces. This transformation also gave Dracula the power to defeat the Sultan. While the Sultan had prepared for Dracula's arrival, understanding the vampire's weaknesses, he had his men cover the tent in silver coins, and he carried a silver long sword, ready to engage Dracula in a duel to the death. The Sultan's preparations proved effective, as he managed to overpower Dracula. Dracula had no advantage at all, and the Sultan seized the opportunity to nearly pierce a stake through his heart. In the crucial moment, Dracula saw his son bound nearby, which reignited his fighting spirit. He knows it's not time to give up yet. Dracula transformed into a swarm of bats, attacking the Sultan from behind and killing him, then escaping with his son. Yet, just as this should have come to an end, the transformed vampire followers turned against Dracula's son with ill intent. Dracula knew he had to act. Things can't continue like this anymore. So first, he killed the troublemakers, then entrusting his son to a priest, to ensure he could inherit the throne. His son was protected by a cross, so the vampires dared not approach. Dracula then looked up to the sky and said that he had fulfilled his wife's wish. He then used his power to disperse the clouds, allowing sunlight to shine on all the vampires. In no time, all the vampires, including him, were wiped out. In doing so, Dracula found his own redemption. The film Dracula Untold was released in 2014. It is an action fantasy film directed by Gary Shore. It tells the story of the king of a small East European nation, Dracula, who made a deal with the devil to become a vampire in order to protect his son from the oppression of the Ottoman Empire and repel the enemy. Dracula was willing to abandon his conscience and soul for his country, making him a hero. Despite the film's script and plot being criticized, in recent years, the image of the sinister and terrifying vampire has been greatly impacted by the new generation of vampires. In works like Twilight and The Vampire Diaries, where vampires are shown living in the sunlight, forgetting their essence and nature, they are an immortal population that can only live in the dark. Dracula Untold brings the memory back to the original vampire.